like scary movies? Good evening and welcome back to Venom's Vault, the podcast where I talk about drag, horror, and my other niche interests. I'm your hostess, Venom, the plus-size vampire MILF of South Texas, and tonight we are going to step into the ring of Venom's Vault's very first Horror Movie Smackdown. We are going to be going through 10 iconic horror battles, and one will reign supreme in each round. And by the end of it, we will crown the fiercest horror film of them all. My opinion is subjective. If you disagree with me in any of these rankings, just please put down in the comments wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it be here on YouTube or on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell me which one you would have ranked as winner and why. So without further ado, let's put down our glasses of wine for once and pick up our boxing gloves and let's get into it. But before I start, I just want to say my hair is gorgeous today. I just styled this wig myself. I like to do a lot of things myself in drag, like sewing and of course my makeup, but most importantly my hair. I just got into styling hair again, and every hair that you've seen me wear on this podcast has been done by yours truly. So I just wanted to point that out before we get into it. So, round one, Ginger Snaps versus Jennifer's Body. Okay, so this is actually a really good pairing. And of course, I chose to put Ginger Snaps and Jennifer's Body together because Ginger Snaps is a coming-of-age story with Ginger Fitzgerald turning into a werewolf. And with Jennifer's Body, we have Jennifer Check turning into a succubi after being kidnapped by hit rock band Low Shoulder of 2009 fame. Which isn't really real, I just thought I would say that. So I'm going to just assume that you've seen all the movies I'm going to be talking about, but I will say that they both definitely have their charm and they're both very intertwined. There is a scene in Jennifer's Body where Jennifer is walking down the hallway and it is very much resembled in 2000's Ginger Snaps. And so since Ginger Snaps came out 9 years before Jennifer's Body, I guess you could say that Jennifer's Body was inspired by that. This is definitely a difficult battle to pick between because I think that both of these films do an excellent job in displaying femininity and the female puberty in very different but also very complementary sorts of ways. I think that Jennifer's Body stylistically is more my speed. I love the time capsule of 2009 that it represents. However, Ginger Snaps just has really amazing storyline as far as Ginger and her sister and how that plot kind of develops. And of course, Ginger Snaps does have 2 sequels. So it is really hard to discern which one will come out on top. However, my final verdict for the first round of our Horror Movie Smackdown is Jennifer's Body. I just really could not pass up the undeniable beauty of Jennifer turning into a succubus. I know that Ginger Snaps has a lot going for it in terms of the special effects and the story. However, stylistically and just as the whole subtext and the metaphor for Jennifer eating men, I think really takes the crown for me. So round one is over. So for round 2, we are going to be going the home invasion route with The Strangers 2008 versus You're Next. So The Strangers holds a near and dear place in my heart because it is another one of those films that I had on DVD growing up as a child. I probably didn't watch it nearly as much as Seed of Chucky or Leprechaun Back to the Hood or The Craft. However, it is definitely one of my favorites, and it takes the home invasion route so well. It is so suspenseful and eerie, and I love the fact that they're just really fucking with her the entire time. I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but throughout the entire film, they have access to the house, they can be inside the house, and they know what they're doing, but it is just the sheer psychological torment of the cat and mouse game that really makes The Strangers a staple film. And 2011's You're Next takes a different approach on this. I really love the kind of corrupted family dynamic that everybody has. There is definitely cliques within the family. There is a hierarchy issue with who's the better brother, who has the best life, sort of thing. However, I really just love the final girl. Erin is the quintessential final girl in this sort of film. I love how she is very resourceful and she uses all of these context clues to kind of conclude who is really the killer, which ends up being her husband's family. So I really don't know what I'm going to pick for my final verdict in this matchup because both of these films are amazing. They have the same home invasion sort of vibe. However, I guess you would consider your next 2011 to be more of a internal sort of parasite, if you will. I really love the cinematography in your next as well. However, I think that The Strangers definitely encapsulates the eerie, spooky, suspenseful vibe that comes with home invasion films alike. So my final verdict for the second round of our Horror Movie Smackdown would be Your Next, 2011. I chose this film to be the winner because I really think that it encapsulates this weird family dynamic while also making it a really fun cat and mouse chase. Erin is an amazing final girl. She's very resourceful, and I really do love this film, and it just barely beats out The Strangers. They have very different vibes, but a very similar premise. For round 4 of our Horror Movie Smackdown, we have the campy round, and I'm going to be using Seed of Chucky 2004 with Leprechaun Back to the Hood. So these are two films that I talked about in the beginning of this podcast, where I definitely did watch these two films growing up so much. Seed of Chucky tackles so many important issues such as gender fluidity, especially in the early 2000s. And I think that there's this funny meta aspect of Seed of Chucky with Tiffany being the doll and really admiring the work of Jennifer Tilly. And I also think that the inclusion of Redman, who is a real person, a real rapper, in this movie also kind of adds to the meta-ness of it, with an amazing cameo by John Waters as this crazed, decrepit, sort of perverse photographer, which I really did enjoy. Conversely, however, Leprechaun Back to the Hood is just such a cult classic. Not a lot of people know about this film, but I definitely probably watched it the most growing up. The part that is engraved in my mind is whenever Leprechaun is walking on this girl's back in the salon and he cracks her neck. That was shocking. And whenever he's chasing one of the protagonists through the boutique and he corners her in a bathroom, she grabs hairspray and a lighter and she just lights his ass on fire. And that was one of my favorite parts of the film. It was so campy, so chaotic, but also very terrifying. I think that what Seed of Chucky and Leprechaun Back to the Hood have in common is that they are very campy and self-aware films while still maintaining a seriousness and an amount of gore that is just so amazing. So, my final verdict for round 3 of our Horror Movie Smackdown is Seed of Chucky 2004. With a gender fluid child and a John Waters cameo, you really can't go wrong in my eyes. I definitely think that this is another round where it was very close, but Seed of Chucky just beats out Leprechaun Back to the Hood by a hair. So for round 4 of our Horror Movie Smackdown, we are going Mia Goth versus Mia Goth with Pearl versus Maxine. So I wanted to put these two up against each other because they're essentially two sides of the same coin. Pearl wanting to be a star so badly but failing miserably at it with the most chilling 6 to 7 minute monologue that I've ever seen on film. It is so amazing, it is so haunting, and it is so relatable. I think that what Pearl has going for it is that a lot of people can see themselves in Pearl as a character, feeling trapped in a small town, feeling bound down by obstacles such as your family. And so I think that Pearl definitely is a great psychological take on this classic and relatable tale that I feel like many people can definitely relate to. Conversely, however, we have Maxine Minx, who is going to be a star no matter what it takes. And this is the other side of the coin that Pearl is on, because Maxine is truly doing whatever she can to be a star. She starts out by making adult films, and this branches off into her getting her big break in a horror film entitled The Puritan. It is a sequel of some sort. I'm not remembering whether it's 2 or 3, by the female director Elizabeth Bender. Maxine getting this role is her time to shine. She is going to be a star and nothing will stop her. Film wise, however, I think that Pearl definitely has this really elegant and kind of grotesque interpretation of the Wizard of Oz Technicolor Nightmare sort of vibe. However, Maxine is entirely different with its 1980s homage and definitely incorporating elements of that found footage vibe in the beginning where we see the Night Stalker is on the prowl in the 1980s, mixed with a little bit of satanic panic imagery. However, my final verdict for round 4 of our horror movie Smackdown would have to go to Pearl. I simply cannot get over the chilling monologue mixed with the fever dreamish aspects of the Technicolor nightmare that is Ty West's Pearl. So moving right along to round 5 of our horror movie Smackdown, we have two classic psychological thrillers. We have Silence of the Lambs versus S7. I believe that's how you pronounce it because the number 7 is literally right in between the word. So that's just my way of pronouncing it. If you pronounce it differently, well, tomato, tomato, you know what I mean? So Silence of the Lambs is kind of a queer-coded movie in its final suspect with kind of like wearing the skin of somebody else. And originally I really wanted to put this film up against Longlegs. However, I have not fully seen Longlegs just yet and I don't want to make any assumptions based off of what I haven't seen. So I decided to put it up against Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman in S7. I really do love S7 because it shows this really grotesque interpretation of the 7 deadly sins through murder. I think that it is very creative in the way that it displays this. I have so many of the deaths kind of ingrained into my memory. I can see the sloth death with this person being barbed wired to a bed, the gluttony death with somebody being so overfed and dead. And oh, the lust death just gives me chills to this day. I think that one of the smartest aspects of S7 would definitely be using envy and wrath as the final bang that the killer uses. John Doe, which that's what I call him because I don't believe he's ever been given a name. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But he is envious of Brad Pitt's life. I don't remember his name in the film, but Brad Pitt, essentially. And whenever we open that box, we see Brad Pitt's wrath. Conversely, in Silence of the Lambs, I think that we focus so much on Clarice and we really get to see her go through a transformation and growth as a detective. I really do love the way that she's sent on these wild goose chases, but she always manages to grow and evolve and become an even better detective for it. She is an amazing protagonist, and the end, oh my goodness, fava beans for life. And one more thing, I'm having an old friend for dinner. My final verdict for round 5 of our horror movie Smackdown would have to be 7. I really just love the creativity between making each of the 7 deadly sins as its own unique murder, and the ending is just so breathtaking. I really do love how Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt work together in this film. They really do have great chemistry, and I think that it just barely edged out Silence of the Lambs. Clarice, I see you and I love you. So, moving right along to round 6 of our horror movie Smackdown, we have The Den versus Megan is Missing. So this matchup, I really had to think because I recently saw Megan is Missing. Even though it had been trending on TikTok prior, I finally found time to watch it, and it was so disturbing. But to pair this up, I remember watching The Den whenever I was fairly young, and I watched it with my uncle and my mother, and we both decided it was a very creepy, weird, but well-paced horror film. So more recently, the internet horror films that we see today are similar to Unfriended, and there's another one, I believe it's called Host, where we have it's told through the perspective of a computer screen entirely. And This is what I love about sort of pseudo found footage films. In Megan is Missing, it really does feel like found footage. Although the acting isn't great, I will definitely admit, and it's a little bit unrealistic, but this is very much the life of some 14-year-olds in real life. You know, my parents grew up in the 90s, and we did not live in the best part of Corpus Christi, and so hearing stories back, it is definitely more akin to what life would have been like back then, with, of course, this movie being set in 2007 rather than the 90s. But I definitely see that this may very well be the life that some teenagers in that time would have lived. And with The Den, it is very interesting mix of horror and kind of just being a flat out gross movie. There is this one scene that's burned into my mind of this phallic object rising up and then shooting substance all over. And it is those kinds of moments in these movies where you just kind of sit there and wonder, why am I watching this? But at the same time, I want to keep watching it just to see where it takes us. And for that reason, my final verdict in round 6 of our horror movie Smackdown is Megan is Missing. Now, this very much might be because I just recently watched this movie, but the barrel, the found footage aspect of it, the last 20 minutes of the entire film is just so haunting and chilling, especially whenever the Josh character digs up this hole and just pushes the barrel into it with Megan's dead body and Amy's live body as she's still talking through the barrel, banging on it, just hoping that he will open it. That was haunting on an entirely different level. So, with that being the end of our internet horror round, we are moving on to something even more grotesque. Round 7 of our horror movie Smackdown, we have Terrifier 2016 versus The Devil's Rejects 2005. So, being born in the era where Devil's Rejects was released, even though I was an infant, I did recently watch this movie about a year back with my parents. And it is definitely, I would say, a pretty good sequel to The House of a Thousand Corpses, another Rob Zombie film. Rob Zombie, I find to be a very divided director. You either love his films like Halloween 2007 or At the House of a Thousand Corpses, or you just, they aren't for you, or you just plain dislike them, which is entirely okay. Me personally, I love some of Rob Zombie's music. I've performed Living Dead Girl, and I plan to perform Dragula soon. But I'm fall into the category of I quite enjoy some of Rob Zombie's directorial choices and the way that he chooses to create films. They almost have these snuff film elements to them, which is really hard to capture, especially when you're doing a produced and scripted film. I love the camera angles, the grittiness, and the grotesqueness that we see in The Devil's Rejects. And similarly, Damien Leone's Terrifier 2016 captures this gritty, gory, and grotesque, and the way that art is murdering these people is just so out of the box. And that's what I love about these sort of low budget hidden films, is that they really go balls to the wall with the way that they display horror. And a lot of people get queasy with body horror or with really gory films, but that is something that I really love because it gets to a point where you just know it's fake, which I really do enjoy. And so when it comes to the Firefly family versus Art the Clown, I'm very torn. I think that both of these films have so much to offer, and whether you like Rob Zombie's filmmaking or you're a fan of this gory sort of subgenre or not, I think that it all comes down to personal preference. My final verdict on round 7 of our horror movie Smackdown would have to be 2016's Terrifier. I simply cannot get past the point in the movie where he is literally scalping this homeless girl and he wears her hair as a wig. And I think that that is so fierce and so silly. And it definitely adds some camp to this otherwise super gory and grotesque film. And that is something that I feel that The Devil's Rejects simply does not have. Honestly, in their defense though, it is a great movie that I really do enjoy, and it probably would have been a more fair comparison to put it up against 1974's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. However, I might just be saving that to talk about in a future episode. Moving right along to round 8 of our horror movie Smackdown, we have none other than one of my favorites, 2016's The Love Witch versus 2010's Black Swan, starring Natalie Portman. This one is probably one of the closest rounds in the battle. I love 2016's The Love Witch for its 1960s aesthetic, for its really beautiful costuming, and for its critique on femininity and the role of females in society. Conversely, I think that 2010's Black Swan has such amazing visuals, with the ending ballet scene just being absolutely gorgeous. The way that Natalie Portman sort of grows wings while she's dancing the Black Swan is absolutely beautiful. And throughout the film, the psychological suspense that we see of her sort of transforming in certain sorts of ways, trying to embody the Black Swan and ultimately consuming her. I think that Nina Sayers is an amazing character, which is played by the amazing Natalie Portman. I just remembered her name off the top of my head. I think that the doppelganger sort of alter ego visuals that we see, I always think of the time that she's walking home from ballet practice and she passes a complete double of herself. And it is reminiscent of the Uncanny course that I saw, where we did talk a lot about alter egos and doppelgangers. It is something that is very interesting to dissect. With this being the closest battle in the horror movie Smackdown, I'm left with a very tough decision. However, the winner of round 8 of our horror movie Smackdown is 2016's The Love Witch. I simply cannot get past Elaine Park's seductive witch-like appeal, as well as the plain aesthetic and technicolor fever dream that is The Love Witch. Anna Biller, if you're watching, if you ever need a drag queen actor, just please hit me up. You know where to find me, venom.reanimated on Instagram. So now that we've had our little feminist round, we move on to round 9, the camp round, but not camp like Seed of Chucky or Leprechaun Back to the Hood. We're talking about summer camp with Fear Street Part 2, 1978, and Sleepaway Camp 2, Unhappy Campers. So originally I wanted to put Sleepaway Camp 2 specifically because in Sleepaway Camp 1 we had Felissa Rose being Angela Baker, and then in Sleepaway Camp 2, we switched actors to Pamela Springsteen being Angela Johnson. She changed her name for whatever reason. You know, she is a murderer after all. And I originally wanted to put Sleepaway Camp 2 up against Nightmare on Elm Street 2 because I think that there is so much similarity between the personality of Angela Johnson / Baker and Freddy Krueger having these really kitschy, campy one-liners, but also being this really devious villain. However, I just really don't think it would be a fair battle. And so I stuck with the summer camp theme to put it up against Fear Street 2, 1978. So the entire Fear Street trilogy, I think, is so ingenious and so amazing. And I'm very excited for Fear Street Prom Night to come out on Netflix soon. Sadie Sink is an amazing actress, and I think that her role in this film just worked so well. I love the whole sister dynamic, was really beautiful to watch, and the entire curse aspect of the film was so interesting to see with the axe, and it's just so classic, and it's almost this sort of love letter to horror, as I believe that Sleepaway Camp 2 Unhappy Campers is sort of just a parody. I really love Sleepaway Camp 2 Unhappy Campers because Angela Baker is just the quintessential silly campy villain that I really do love. I love the one-liners, I love the creative deaths, I love the 1980s appeal from a real 1980s film, and I think that that's something that Fear Street 2 1978 unfortunately cannot really replicate. And so my final verdict of round 9, our camp round, would be Sleepaway Camp 2 Unhappy Campers. Poor Molly, you almost made it. And finally, round 10, rounding out our horror movie Smackdown, is 2021's Malignant versus the classic Basket Case. So I've always heard about Basket Case, but it wasn't until I had the idea to make this podcast and was playing with some matchups that I finally watched it, and it is such a stupid movie, and I mean that in the best possible way. I mean, arguably a lot of these films on this Smackdown would be stupid movies. That's just the realm of horror that I love, you know, doing drag and being so inspired by these campy horror films. I thought that it was only right that I put Basket Case up against James Wan's 2021 film Malignant, which takes a more serious approach to this sort of evil conjoined twin blob thing aspect of horror, which is a very niche subgenre, but I really wanted it to be represented within this tournament. The conjoined twin trope has been done numerous times in horror, but never quite like 2021's Malignant. I love how Gabriel is inside of the protagonist's head. I cannot remember her name off the top of my head, but I love that he is inside her head, and this is being alluded to throughout the film whenever all of the chase scenes or scary scenes that we see with the killer is the killer running backwards, and that's kind of just a hint to the fact that it's all in her head, literally, with Gabriel. And so one of my favorite quotes from this movie is just, "Gabriel, no!" I always think of it, and my uncle and I joke around about it all the time. And conversely with Basket Case, it is just so fucking ugly, but in the most charming way possible. It definitely has that charming late 1980s and 90s sort of just weird practical effect look to it, and it's very charming actually. Story-wise, I didn't get much from it, but I definitely think that my favorite parts were when Basket Case was on screen. And so, with that being said, the final verdict for round 10, the final round of our Horror Movie Smackdown, is 2021's Malignant. The prison scene, the twist, the practical and special effects, gorgeous, amazing, enough said. And there you have it, 10 iconic and horrific horror movie battles. But in the end, the winner is horror itself. Psychological torment, final girls, and campy chaos will always have a special place in my heart and here on Venom's Vault. You can find me on every social media platform at venom.reanimated. I don't know if I ever explained this, but Instagram did take down my original account, so I had to be reanimated, and here I am. Thank you so much for listening, watching, and or streaming wherever you get your podcasts. The video version will be on YouTube, and the audio version will definitely be on Spotify and wherever else you get your podcasts. However, do not hang up your body bags just yet, because next time on Venom's Vault, we are dressed to kill, peeling back the layers of leather, lace, and latex in all of our favorite horror movie villains. I'm going to be analyzing the costumes of famous horror icons such as Ghostface, Leatherface, and Chucky, and maybe some more lesser known horror icons like American Mary 2012. Thank you so much again for listening to this podcast, and remember, keep your heels high, your knives sharp, and the blood fake. And I'll see you next time in the vault. Bye.